organization of the Canadian Ecumenical Anti-Racism Network. We're very mindful that we are approaching the end of March 2023 and that we have just gone through two very major, very important observances. On March 21st, we observed the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. On March 25th, certainly many of us observed the International Day of Remembrance for the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. And we are hosting this event out of an acknowledgement that racism is something that we must continue to address, confront, and dismantle as part of our walk of faith. I want to just share for those who are not familiar that the Canadian Ecumenical Anti-Racism Network, CEARN, of the Canadian Council of Churches, is an expression of Canadian churches working together to support anti-racism programs and educators who are working in their churches, sharing resources and learning among anti-racism educators, and supporting long-term change in Canadian churches and church organizations. The mandate of CEARN is to accompany churches and church organizations in Canada who are working towards racial justice, racial reconciliation, and peace to transform themselves and their communities. And we certainly hope that if you have joined us for this experience today, you too are interested in pursuing a greater commitment to dismantling racism and perhaps becoming part of this community of practice if you are not already. I'd like to open with prayer. Loving Spirit, teach us compassion in our differences. Teach us to love fully and radically all of your children as their true and whole selves. Lead us with courage to be advocates for people of all identities, just as you sent your advocate through the Holy Spirit. God of love, hear our prayer. So, welcome. My name is Irene Moore Davis. I'm from All Saints Anglican Church in Windsor and a member of the Anglican Church of Canada Dismantling Racism Task Force, as well as Black Anglicans of Canada. And I'm so pleased that you are all joining us here. It's also been my pleasure to be part of the working group made up of many wonderful people of faith who have worked together to create this event and make it available to you. At this time, I would like to bring us to a moment where we focus on the land on which we are sitting or standing or existing in this moment, and really ponder and reflect on that as we begin.
What I've learned from my elders is that when we do acknowledgement of the land, it's not about acknowledging whose land it belongs to, because that indigenous worldview, we never owned the land. We were simply caretakers of it for future generations. And what I've been taught from my elders is that when we do that acknowledgement of the land, it's much more than just the territory. It's about relationships. It's about our relationships with people that share the land. It's our relationships with Mother Earth. It's our relationships with the four-legged, the finned, the feathered, the crawlers, the original stewards of Mother Earth. It's that relationship that we acknowledge with the trees. It's that acknowledgement that we have with the plant life that is part of the food chain and helps us exist. It gives us our medicines for healing, gives us food for nutrients. It gives us our medicines for ceremonies. We acknowledge water. Water is sacred. Water is life. And what we're told is that when we acknowledge that water, that we always have to acknowledge the carriers of those teachings, which are the woman. So we do that in the same voice. We also acknowledge the infinite wisdom of the grandfathers. Then we take that to the next level, is which acknowledging that relationship that we have with father-son, or in some nations, brother-son. We acknowledge that relationship that we have with Nokomis, Grandma Moon, and how she cleanses Mother Earth. We acknowledge that relationship that we have with our distant relations, the star people. So when we talk about acknowledging the land, it's so much more so than just acknowledging what nation was on that. As we know all throughout the history of Turtle Island, is that indigenous people were, for the most part, nomadic people. They shifted. They would move from season to season. It just so happens that Sheridan sits on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, which I'm very proud to always share and educate with people. But in the same breath, I also acknowledge that many, many other nations have walked this territory, and that their ancestors are still here amongst us.
Thank you. At this time, we will ask for Esther Wesley to offer a prayer. Esther, you are on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Creator God, we thank you for bringing us together for this sacred conversation. Our conversation will be sacred if we trust in your Holy Spirit. You created us all in your image and gave us the best of yourself to share with each other. Your love, your grace, your mercy, and your peace. Yet we fail to love as you called us to love. We fail to show your mercy and grace to our brothers and sisters who don't look or don't think as we do. We tend to bring pain and divisiveness instead of peace. Help us to appreciate our differences, to appreciate and learn from the great spectrum of languages, cultures, and traditions of your people around the world. Help us to grow in the knowledge of others, a knowledge that can only deepen our relationship with you. Give us strength and courage to risk a helping hand, a word, a gesture to build relationship with all people. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Esther. That was a very beautiful and meaningful prayer.
Yes.
We would encourage anyone who is participating in this event today to mention in the chat the traditional territories or lands on which you are now sitting as you go through this journey with us. I would like to invite one of our working group members, Natalie, to please share our community covenant.
Thank you, Irene, and hi, everyone. I'm just gonna see if I can, David, could you advance the slide, please? And to the next one, and one more. Thank you. So welcome, everyone. My name is Natalie Appleyard. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining from the unceded and unsurrendered traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And we are going to be engaging in a discussion about a community covenant today to just guide the ways that we're engaging with one another as we discuss what are heavy and difficult topics. And so this community covenant is something that we'd like to propose in terms of the ways that we engage with one another. There will be an opportunity after I go through this for folks to share whether there are other suggestions that you would like to have added in terms of considerations you'd like us to keep in mind, particularly during our breakout group discussions, which we'll be having following the moderated panel conversation. But for now, I'll just take you through these initial suggestions. So the community covenant that we're proposing to you as our members, the first note or the first agreement that we'd like to make is that we're here to listen and bear witness to truth telling, excuse me, without jumping to offer solutions or action. So we recognize that there are times when we're just asked to sit and listen, and that this is a critical step in our personal and communal healing and transformation. We recognize that there are times for action as well, but that must be informed by and accompanied by the time spent listening, processing, and healing. So this particular gathering is a space for Black, Indigenous, Asian, and other racialized persons to share their stories and for participants to bear witness. The second point of our community covenant asks us to honor the dignity and differences of each participant. So each participant agrees to treat one another with dignity, recognizing our inherent worth, our different experiences, needs, and contributions to the work of justice and the dynamics, excuse me, the dynamics of power and privilege within our group. We also want to note that sharing is an invitation, not an obligation. So when we have our breakout room discussions, for example, or even for our panelists, I know you've already discussed amongst one another, but if at any point anyone chooses that they'd rather not share or would rather not respond to a question that's asked, please understand that this is an invitation, not an obligation. So no one's to be put on the spot. The breakout room discussions will involve a talking circle, as well as kind of just an open discussion, and we'll speak a bit more about that later on. So we want to give people the opportunity to share, but please also feel free to pass if you would prefer. We're inviting one another to speak from our own experiences rather than using or commenting on others' experiences. So this helps to keep us engaged in noticing and working through our own thoughts and reactions rather than critiquing or advising other people. And it also helps to ensure that people are not being misrepresented by others speaking on their behalf. And it prevents the dismissal of others' experiences by those who don't share them. We are inviting one another to choose authenticity over performativity. So that just means that we want to own our real thoughts, feelings, reflexes, and behaviors. There are responses that happen in our bodies before our minds even have a chance to engage. So sometimes it's tempting in these spaces, particularly for folks with bodies that look like mine, because of white supremacy, to feel that we need to show, how much we've learned or try to perform. But instead, we want to be real and notice our actual gut reactions and thoughts and emotions. And so again, if you feel it's best not to share, that can be an option, or if you are going to share, then let's be authentic about it. And consider whether you're speaking or remaining silent to avoid your own discomfort versus doing so out of consideration for someone else's well-being. So for some of us, that might mean taking a step back. For others, that might mean stepping into this. We'd like to invite everyone to distinguish between comfort and safety. So real learning and growth often requires us to move beyond our comfort zones, particularly when we're discussing challenging topics like power and privilege. But at the same time, real trauma and harm, though unintended, are still very much possible in the context of these discussions, particularly for those who in their everyday lives experience systemic oppression and violence. So we want to make sure that we are inviting one another to sit with discomfort at times. So we do want to make sure that there's some support available as well. But we want to distinguish discomfort with feeling unsafe. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to make sure that people feel as safe as possible in this space. And we will also share a little bit of information about some people who have volunteered to act as active listeners and resource people should anyone feel the need to take some time apart and speak with someone one-on-one if you're feeling triggered or if you're experiencing the need for additional support. We'll talk about how you can access that support in the meeting. Please choose curiosity over judgment. If someone shares something with you with which you disagree, doubt, or have not yourself experienced, we ask you to adopt a stance of curiosity about what they mean, how they came to that position, as well as what has brought you to your position, rather than responding with judgment. So let's try to avoid making assumptions about one another. We invite each other to share space and share the work. So we believe that each of us has a role to play. Those roles might look different depending on our social location. So please be mindful of how much time you're spending talking versus listening, and make sure that we're allowing others the space, time, and sometimes silence to share their own contributions. So we're going to commit to ensuring that voices that are typically marginalized are given time and space to be heard and are not dismissed, devalued, corrected, or tone policed. And the last point in our community covenant that we're proposing today is the idea of double confidentiality. One person who participated in an advisory group that helped to shape this community covenant put it this way. They said, the stories should stay private and the lessons leave with us, and the lessons are to be shared publicly. So any personal information that is shared within the group stays within this group. If something's shared within the group, we ask that you not bring it up with others outside the group. So for example, if you know some of the participants in the meeting today and you hear someone share something and you see them outside of this meeting, we ask that you not bring it up, because that might not be a context in which the person feels ready to discuss it. So again, please feel free to share the lessons that you have learned personally through your experience with this group, but please don't share other people's information or stories. So those are the main points of the proposed community covenant. And so we'd ask that all participants respect that. We'll review much more briefly the community covenant before we begin our breakout group discussions later on. But if there are other pieces that you would like us to consider, please feel free to use the chat. So I see if folks can't access the chat, that someone has shared, know that the space is sacred and can be vulnerable. So thank you for sharing that. Are there other pieces that people would like considered with our community covenant as well? Well, please feel free to send a message either to the group or to any of us who have CEARN, CEARN, ahead of our names. We're some of the volunteers that have been bringing this together, or CCC-Phil, David, who is providing our tech support. So if you have questions, then you can also share those with us. And Irene, would you like me to speak about the support available, or would you like to do that?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So we're really grateful for a number of people who have offered to be available as active listeners and provide some one-on-one support should anyone need it. So I'm going to look for some of these folks that have offered. So I'm going to invite Reginald. I'm going to pin your video, and would you like to unmute and say hello?
Sorry. Hello, everyone. My name is Reginald Crenshaw. I'm a member of the Anglican Diocese of Toronto. And I volunteered for this because I have been parts of these kinds of discussions for a very long time and realized that there are times we reach those spaces where we need to stop, we need to reflect, and we need someone to even help us work through the pain we're experiencing at the moment. And so, having been through that on both sides, I offered to perform that, be a partner in that role today.
Thank you, Reginald.
So thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to also welcome Chung-Yan Lam to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Chung-Yan Lam. I'm a Lutheran serving at an Anglican parish in Ottawa, and happy to be with you to support and have conversations if you need.
Thank you. And I'm also available as a resource person if anyone would like to receive support. So what we would invite participants to do, if you're able to access the chat, you can send me a private message just saying that you would appreciate support. If you would like to identify which person you would like to speak to, you can do so, or I can chat with you to determine who you might feel most comfortable speaking with. And then David, who's providing our tech support today, will create a private breakout room where the two of you will be placed so that you can have a private one-on-one conversation in the Zoom meeting, and then you can rejoin them in session at any time. So that's how we're trying to create some support available if at any time during the meeting you feel you benefit from that. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kim. So once again, we are so delighted that you have joined us this afternoon, this evening, or this morning, depending where you are, and that you are participating in this very important discussion, understanding that listening is a very critical piece of what is going to be happening today. We are about to embark on a panel discussion that I think you'll find very intriguing. Followed after that, we will have an opportunity for you to debrief in small group breakout rooms. And please understand that when we do offer you the opportunity to go into breakout rooms, we will ask that the facilitators, those who have come forward as volunteers to be facilitators, should head into those breakout rooms first. Once that happens, we will encourage other participants to join the breakout rooms. We do have breakout rooms that are set up for people who have lived specifically with racism, who have lived on the underside of oppressive systems of racism and injustice, and who identify as Black, Indigenous, Asian, persons of color, who have lived experience of racism within the church or outside of the church. There will be breakout rooms specifically for you if you wish to go into that safe space environment. For others, there are mixed rooms where anyone can join, whether they are people who come from lived experiences of racism or not. And there are rooms specifically for allies and accomplices and those who just want to be supportive to and participating in dismantling racism, in walking in alignment with and alliance with those who experience it. So after the panel discussion, we'll head to those breakout rooms. In the meantime, I would love to encourage all of you to give a listening ear to this panel conversation that is about to happen. And the panel will be introduced by Kim Kai and Natalie Appleyard. So please give them your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. My name is Kim Kai. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm presently the co-chair of CEARN. I live in Toronto on the treaty lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and Mississaugas of the Credit, and I live in covenantal relationship. The National Canadian Ecumenical Anti-Racism Network, just to give a little bit of history, began shortly after the 2001 United Nations World Conference in Durban, South Africa, against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. And now, 22 years later, churches still have a role to play in this healing justice work. When this planning team began brainstorming ideas for a gathering, a theme began to emerge around belonging. Our human need to belong is a universal and on par with our need for love. Churches are well positioned to build cultures of belonging for all peoples, and yet we often fall short. CEARN aims to nurture a space of belonging for all of our churches and all peoples who belong to those churches or those who belong to agencies connected with the Canadian Council of Churches. So today we're honored to have an eloquent panel to help us hear personal and vulnerable stories in church contexts in relationship also with one another as they speak together, and to deepen our understanding of belonging in our churches. They will each introduce themselves, but we are now in the position to welcome with great joy Esther Wesley, whom you've heard introduce our beginning and our prayer at the beginning. Esther is one of the original members of CEARN, and many of us consider her our elder. Jeffrey Dale and Natalie will introduce the next two panelists.
Thank you. I just will note, I don't actually see Jeffrey's name in the meeting. So Jeffrey, if you are signed in with a different name, please identify yourself. Otherwise, I'm happy to introduce Hector Acero-Ferrer, who will be one of our panelists, and the panelist will, the panel conversation will also be moderated by Ruva Gwekwerere. So welcome, Hector and Ruva. And we'll see if we can find Jeffrey, but if not, I will invite you to get started. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and being part of this conversation. I'm really grateful to get to be here and moderate this and share. So the the structure that we're using is going to be more of a conversation for the panelists. So I will have some questions that I'll prompt the other panelists with, but we really are going to be doing this in a structure that is structured by the conversation that we have, because we felt that that's a good way to be able to fully share stories. And yes, so we're really happy to be here. So sorry, do we know if Jeffrey's gonna be here or?
I haven't seen him yet, so we'll see if we can get in touch with Jeffrey.
Okay, perfect. Then I'll start with the introductions. As Natalie said, my name is Ruva Guacarere. I'm currently the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Coordinator for the Congregation de Notre Dame. I have a background academically in political science and women's and gender studies, as well as I've worked at Citizens for Public Justice and sat on the board at Development and Peace Caritas Canada and Black Lives Matter Sudbury. So I'm coming to this with both a professional interest and a personal interest, obviously. These issues are very much close to my heart, as are these kinds of gatherings, and I'm excited to be here. And next, if you will, I would like to ask Esther if you would go ahead and just do an introduction for us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, to be with you all this afternoon. As you heard, my name is Esther Lester, and you also heard I was one of the members of the first members of CEARN after 2001 World Council of Churches sponsorship of people to attend the World Conference on Racism in Durban, South Africa. And I've been involved with the anti-racism work for many, many years. Not because I was educated in that. Yes, I was in a way, but because of the racism from experience in Canada, the racism faced by Indigenous people of Canada. So that is really where I came from. I live in Toronto. I have been here over 20 years. And so I live in, well, not with my family, but all my family has moved away. I think I introduced myself last week to say that it's just now my husband and I live here. And yeah, I'm retired from working with the Anglican Church of Canada as the Healing Fund Coordinator, which allowed me to travel across Canada to all the little villages that exist in Canada and across the Arctic. I was blessed to meet many people and many, many teachers that I just cannot begin to tell how many people I learned from. So that's where my story is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther, for sharing that with us. And next, if Hector, you could go ahead and do a little introduction for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm honored to be part of this panel. I am joining from Waterloo, Ontario today, from Martin Luther University College, the territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. I was born and raised in in Abayala. So I'm a Colombian born in the territory of the Muisca and the Chibcha civilizations. I teach here at Martin Luther University College in Waterloo. I also work at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, and I'm a PhD candidate there. My area of exploration of research is philosophy of religion, particularly liberation theology and the theologies that emerged in Latin America during the 20th century. A lot of the work that I do is only really tangentially connected to what we're talking about here today, more than a specific concern about racism. Is a concern about alternative systems of knowledge, people that have developed ways of looking at religion, faith, theology, and the world differently from the Western tradition, and also how that comes into contact and in conversation with the West at large. I am now a Canadian citizen, and I've been in Canada for about 15 years. I'm grateful to be able to be in this territory, and I know that by accepting to be a citizen, I am also endorsing, in a sense, or being complicit to a lot of the historical the damages that have been done on the peoples that originally inhabited this territory. So I'm committed to reconciliation, to restoration, to dialogue, and as much as I can within my own communities, I try to raise awareness about issues connected to indigeneity. That's I'm happy to share more when we have a larger conversation, but for now, that's who I am and what I'm offering to you today.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited for our conversation. So I think for me to start, since this gathering, we're going to be discussing belonging. One of the things I think we wanted to start the conversation with was defining belonging to us specifically. So for you, what does belonging mean? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And how do we feel racism has, affected belonging within Christian churches? Maybe, on a personal level, but also, in your experience institutionally, what has that meant? Just because I know we've had like both personal contact with churches, but also in our professional lives. So if you could speak to that a little bit, Esther, if you would like to start. Also, Esther, I think we're having a little bit trouble with your audio. So if you wouldn't mind trying without headphones, it might make it a little clearer, just because I think we're getting a little interference with the microphone there.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I'll turn off. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. The question was, how do you define belonging? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. How do I define belonging? For me, how I define belonging is a place where I am comfortable with who I am and what I am. It's like going home after being away It's like going home, and when you arrive at home, you give a sigh and say, ah, now I'm home. That to me is belonging. It is a feeling that I really never had in a church, in a dominant society. Now, when I said while working for the Anglican Church of Canada that I traveled across the country, I really, for the 20 years that I was there, I really did not have one place I could call my home church in Toronto, except where my husband was part of. But I did not attend that church very often because I was out. I traveled and I attended many, many churches across the country. When I say I attended churches, it was part of my work. So it had to do a lot of presentations at those churches or preaching at these different churches. In urban centers, in many urban centers, it was never really where I can have a sigh and say, I belong to this church or I am comfortable at this church. It was a different story when I went to churches in the isolated northern part of Canada. That was a different feeling of being accepted who you are and what you are and where you came from. That was to me a belonging. It's not until just very recently that I have gotten used to going to church in Toronto. I went to church mostly just to be really not to be, I guess, invisible. I wanted to go and worship, but be invisible. The churches that I went often had white people, very, very few racialized people. I mean, very few. So most often going to church meant, for me, most often it meant you walk in the church and people stare and people avoid until you start talking to people. I tried talking to people who often I felt were avoiding me. And so how could I feel I belong? It often felt people are curious, out of curiosity, would come to me and ask me questions or talk to me out of curiosity. But in offering your thoughts and opinions on any topic that is being discussed or topics of conversation, I was offered buts, and that didn't feel like being part of the church or being accepted and not at all comfortable. I mean, that was just also part of the work that I was doing. There was always so many buts. And how has the racism part was often, at some places, I will say, at some churches, was quite obvious. I'll give you one story. a church where I was speaking in Toronto, in just, I'll just say Toronto area. I won't name the area. In the Anglican church where you're at, where people come together to say, to offer each other a piece of Christ. I was at this church and people lining up to offer each other a piece of Christ. One person stood in front of me and looked at me and just passed by. The person that I was sitting next to said to me, "What was that all about?" And I said to her, "You just saw, you just witnessed racism." It meant I was not going to be offered the peace of Christ. I did not receive peace of Christ from this person. So that is just one story. That's just one example of what I saw to me of racism in the church. And there were many others. And how the person asked me, how that must be devastating for you? And I said, no, not really. I said, I have seen many things like this in my lifetime. But what is devastating to me is, what if this happened to a younger person who is not used to going to church, a young person or a young adult who is out to find a place of belonging, a young person who's racialized, doesn't have to be indigenous, and faces this? Do you think this person would come back to church when he or she is told you don't deserve the peace of Christ? So these are some of the things that I faced in my work as an Indigenous person working for the national office of the Anglican Church of Canada. And I'm not just saying it's only happened in the Anglican churches. It happened in other churches. So that is far from what I call belonging. But as far as belonging, yes, I belong to a church because I go and worship. I worship God. And for me, I belong with the body of Christ. That is my belief. That is my faith. Not necessarily with people, but with my God. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. That was really a lot to reflect on. And thank you for sharing so deeply. Hector, if you would like to share into the conversation next on that same question.
Thank you. It's a very big question, and I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to do the question as much justice as Esther did to it, but I'll try with a little story, and I think I'm gonna go from the second question to the first one. So from the experience of racism to what belonging is, and I want to illustrate that with a story. Maybe I'll situate myself first. In my time in Canada, I've worshipped mainly within Anglican and Roman Catholic settings. So the experience that I am telling you about is experience that happened within those settings. So I cannot really speak for anything beyond that. And there is something really interesting about racism. Is a bit like when you look at art, and you know something is beautiful or something is not, and you can't really explain why sometimes unless you really know. When you're a person of color, you're interacting with people at a church and or in any setting, and you kind of know when it's racism, but you can't really put your finger on exactly what is happening. Um, it's a lot about motivation. So you only see outward behaviors, and people behave in many different ways for many different reasons. So you can't really know what is motivating that. But uh, there are some things that make it more obvious. So I'll give you an example. So I was going for a few years with my partner to a church, um, and I noticed I was always um, greeted as a guest. And you know, when you show up to a place of worship and you're welcome the first day, you think, this is beautiful. Like I'm being welcomed. I'm being this is hospitality at its best. Um, Especially when it's a small setting and you feel that the community really embraces you. When you're welcomed the second time, you start asking yourself the question, what why am I treated as a guest again? Maybe they are just ensuring that I am being welcomed. Um, when it's been like months and people don't identify you, but my partner is white, and that person is identified by name, and I'm not. So I start asking myself the question, what? Why am I not memorable? Why am I not? Why am I continued to be a guest? I often will get questions way into my being in a church, such as, um, what I welcome. Like, have you seen what we have at our church? We're making that distinction ours, and you are coming in as a stranger. And I never noticed really until like months into all of this interaction that there was a racial component to it. That for people in that congregation, I could not be one of them. I was welcome to be a guest, but never one of them. Again, this is veil soft racism. This is not something that this is not a big offense. I'm not heartbroken by it. It's just a dynamic that I kind of learned to negotiate, and I needed to learn that at that place I will always be a guest. And that is a story to illustrate the question that you were asking us at the beginning. What do you define as belonging, or what do you mean by belonging? Well, I feel I belong when I can actually be a host to others, when I am not only a guest. I come from a very hospitable culture. Colombian, Latin American people always welcome you into their houses, but quickly you move from being a guest to being a host. Like you're soon in a Colombian household, you're assigned tasks. You are assigned to serve others. So for me, that transition between guest and host is so important to feel that I belong. It doesn't matter how welcoming people are, if they always perceive me as a foreigner or a stranger, I don't think I belong. And if you want me to tell you what has defined my experience in churches, around kind of racist behaviors around me, is being that divide, is that beautiful attitude towards welcoming me, but always on the other side of a wall. You are welcome as long as you know you are not one of us. Um, yeah, that takes different expressions. So one of them is what I just described, but also, I have an accent. I know it's difficult to understand me sometimes, but it's been challenging for me to become a reader at churches, or to make the announcements. And I have tons of little experiences of hostility surrounding me, having actual roles of of belonging within church settings. But I won't kind of bother you with those. I just wanted to leave with you that sense of if we want people to belong, we need to ensure that they actually can be hosts, that they feel that they can welcome others, that there isn't that divide that will make them always guests. And perhaps the other side of that is to be less concerned about defining or creating boundaries around what is racist and what is not racist behaviors, what is clearly hostile and not. That is very difficult to determine. That is difficult to determine for white people. Is difficult to determine for anybody. Is more of a, kind of this where the spirit is, where the spirit of the question is, where the spirit of the person is. I usually invite people around me to, like, don't be afraid. If you want to say something and you're afraid that it might be something racist, just say it. I am happy kind of helping you curate that. I'll tell you. But if you're concerned about that already, it means that your heart is in the right place, and I will take it well. More than my presence there as a person of color means that you cannot ask questions, you cannot say things, you need to be, because that just perpetrates the same us and them distinction that I would not be. I don't want to inhabit. I want to inhabit a church in which we all belong. We all can play hosts or guests.
Thank you so much, Hector. Thank you from both you and Esther's speaking. I think it's very telling that though you are both, we've only met for, I think, about an hour or so before this, but both of your experiences feel so close to my heart of the experiences I've had in my life. And I think that's very telling about how generalized some of these feelings are in the church. And although these are your personal experience, I very much feel that they define well what I've experienced as well. And yes, so I think we were able to get a hold of Jeffrey, thankfully. So Jeffrey, if you would like to start with an introduction, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I apologize, everyone. I was having some technical difficulties today. My name is Jeffrey Dale. My pronouns are they, them, and he, him. And I'm the Minister for Justice and Faith Formation in the United Church of Canada for Shining Waters Regional Council and Canadian Shield Regional Council, which doesn't mean a lot to other people that aren't in the United Church when they don't know what a regional council is. So I often tell folks it covers from Toronto to Thunder Bay, just to sort of give you a geographical area in Ontario. But I am situated here on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And would you like me to start sort of with answering the question? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Hector, for what you shared there too. Something that I have spent a lot of time since we spoke and I was invited to speak was thinking about exactly what it is that I can say from my position. I am white. Both my parents are white, and back as far as I can do in my ancestral history, about 8 to 10 generations are white as well, settlers in southwestern Ontario as well. And so I think those pieces of my story is important for me to recognize, especially with my relationship in the church, especially recognizing that I grew up in an area as well that once was traditional territory for many Indigenous communities, and then they were moved. I grew up in southwestern Ontario, and many of them were moved to the Bruce Peninsula, actually, that area, so that land could be settled. And so I situate that within my understanding of the church and how we then engage not only Indigenous, but other racialized folks and I think one of the things that often comes up for me and something that I really sit with is a lot of the times in the church, I hear a lot about this desire to create a safe space. A lot of people will say to me, we're creating a safe space. We want to create a safe space. But something that I've learned, and I've learned this through my work with folks, particularly folks that live with substance use or substance use disorder, is that no space is ever safe. No space can ever be safe. We can never make a safe space, not even by ourselves. With ourselves, can we actually make a safe space? But one of the things that we can work to do, and one of the things that I feel I can work to do, is to reduce the harm in the space that I am present in, to work to reduce that, to educate myself, to engage myself, to listen to the stories of those that I'm connecting with, to engage in those stories, to ask the questions, to wonder about the person to person. One of my dear friends who was a leading elder in the United Church of Canada, Lorna Standing Ready, once told me that if you want to work on right relations, you start with working on relationship one-on-one. And I think that's the piece of the church that I really hold on to. When I think of when racism comes into the conversation in the church, I recognize that a great deal of it is because we as white people don't take serious the responsibility of sanctuary in the church. We all seek a place of sanctuary in this world. And so for me, it becomes this piece of how do we seek sanctuary in a world that is so unsafe? And how do we reduce that harm? After we spoke, I really started to think about how I came to a place of even starting this journey of developing an understanding of what it means to be anti-racist. And a big piece of it for me, it didn't come through the church, to be honest. It didn't come through formal education. It didn't come through my parents. They're very nice people, but it didn't come through any of those sort of channels. It came through theater. And working in theater when I was younger and reading so many, theater was where I learned what a residential school was. Theater was where I learned that Black people in Ontario are more highly incarcerated than any other race. Theater was where I learned about the Japanese internment camps. Theater was where I learned these stories, and they were told through such a personal lens that there was a connection that I could feel deep within me, even if it wasn't the person on the stage's story. The story was personal, human to human, heart to heart. And so I sit today with this idea or this recognition that I can never create a safe space in the church, but I can seek to reduce harm through relating one-to-one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was really great, especially I think the part about reducing harm is something that we can, we can all do. And I think it's really important for us to remember that, especially when I think some of it can feel very difficult, a lot of this work, but when a goal like reducing harm can really break it down into a place that feels doable, and because it's work that we must do. Right. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. So I was thinking we could maybe finish up another round with talking about how we feel in terms of belonging, church communities can move forward. From our personal experiences, what are the things that we think are just important to keep in mind? So that's not only, like more, concrete actions such as this, but I guess the things that we really think are important in terms of belonging on a personal level, maybe even on an institutional level, going forward, what can be done, and how can those relations work for us? So Esther, if you wanted to go next. And yeah, if we could kind of keep it brief to wrap it up for the next few minutes. Thank you.
Okay, I think one of the things I would say first off is to be willing to learn. Church or the church people must be willing to learn from other people. We have a whole world of people within different cultures, different understanding, different faiths, different belief systems, and be willing to accept those and listen carefully, accepting their thoughts, their opinions without offering what I had said, but accepting those thoughts. Because for me, God is sending to our doorstep, literally, the diversity of the world. And he created diversity of the world, diversity of people who bring their gifts to God's house of prayer. And we need to learn to accept people's values and belief systems. And I'm saying this to go beyond tokenism, beyond just words to say. Often you hear, oh, that's a good idea. That is interesting idea. But beyond that, to really look at it and think about it, and to really offer it to God to say, okay, here I am. Help me understand. Those have been my thoughts. And I'm being very brief here.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much, Esther. That was really, really good, deep wisdom. Hector, if you'd like to go next.
Perhaps two things, and combining a little bit of the questions that we had left. The first part is kind of where have I felt kind of belonging, or how can the church provide belonging? I do think I'm very hopeful that the church continues to be a place of transformation for people. And my deepest moments of consolation in church have been around people transforming their worldview and imagining me and people that look like me and people that are much more racialized than me as part of their own community, and really imagining that, really changing how they think. And I'm always fascinated by the ability that people have to really kind of reinvent their own communities to imagine more people within those. And the second part of it, and this I get from some of the things that I teach here on intersectionality, is the work on kind of decolonizing spaces, on changing them, on changing ourselves, is constant. We are somehow, through this like interest in working on anti-oppression, anti-racism, we are getting the idea that we kind of get through the anti-racism mill, and then we're anti-racist. Okay, no problem. Or that if we are ourselves racialized, we are not racist ourselves. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. We're all racist. That white, black, brown, doesn't matter. We live in those spaces. We are raised within that tradition. We have aspects of ourselves that are themselves. We need to fight. Whether they are appointed in or pointed out. That's how I see that interaction. So I do feel that that needs to be constantly attuned. Like our default is to oppress, is to be racist, is to. So let's know that that's a lifelong task. We need to wake up every morning and commit ourselves to being less racist, being less oppressive, being less, and keep checking, keep being critical of ourselves, um, and maybe in that setting, if we are all doing the exact same thing, then we actually will create spaces that will somehow give birth to generations that don't have that burden of having been born with racism built into their systems.
Thank you so much, Hector. Those are really great points, and a lot to learn from. Thank you. And finally, Jeffrey, if you had some on that question as well.
Yeah, I started to really think about something that I challenged myself when I was in theological school, particularly when it came to our homiletics class, was I challenged myself to only read and utilize commentaries that were written by people that were not white, by racialized people. And here's what I'm going to share. There's very few out there, at least in the University of Toronto's library system. It was very difficult to find commentaries or find biblical scholarship in the University of Toronto that was not written by a white person and mainly by a white male person. And so something I started to really realize and something I started to really think about was right now we're living in a world where the center of Christianity, which once was Eurocentric, is now in the global south. And those of us that still live in a Eurocentric sort of place are not trying to do the work ourselves to discover what the theologies are in the global south, where the center of Christianity is being housed, where it lives right now. And so to me, one of the things that I continue, and I'm grateful to what Esther and Hector just said, because I continue to challenge myself to say, okay, I did that in theological school. Now, how do I keep challenging myself throughout my career to keep seeking out those commentaries, not just for myself, but to share with others too, and say, here is a perspective that wasn't readily accessible when we were being formed in our education, and why.
Thank you so much for that, Jeffrey. Yes, I think it really it's really important to look at where we're learning from too, because those things really help us to understand the roots of those beliefs that are so deeply entrenched in us, you know, as Hector has said, so that we can do the work, because it starts with, you know, being aware, and then we can continue to do that work. And thank you for all of your sharings here. I think we can really take that into our coming conversations and learn from them. I'm really honored to have been able to moderate this conversation, and I'm looking forward to having more of them. And I shall pass it off to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that everyone, and I trust that everyone, found that really intriguing, informative, inspiring, and hopefully motivating in some ways. We now have an opportunity to go into our breakout rooms, and David is going to shortly enable those breakout rooms to be joined. Just a reminder, we're going to just have an opportunity to review the community covenant. So that's really important. We had an opportunity at the beginning of this session, or near the beginning of this session, to just review our community covenant and all of the things that should kind of guide the way that we interact with one another today. We will have an opportunity to get together into some breakout rooms. They will be set up according to the following strategy. We have some breakout rooms that are devoted to safe spaces for people who are living on the underside of racist systems, those who have experienced racism and racial injustice, to spend time together in wholeness and uninterrupted. So those are safe spaces specifically for Black, Indigenous, Asian persons of color who have experienced racism, who have lived experience of racism, and who want to talk to one another. And we respectfully ask that those who are not affected by racism in a day-to-day way as part of your lived experience, do you keep those rooms safe for the BIPOC participants. We also have rooms available for you to go into and have discussions with a mixed group. And Natalie has just given us a link to the community covenant in the chat if you wanted to review that. So please do check the chat if you want to review those guidelines and suggestions. We also have breakout rooms that are set up for those who are wanting to be together with people of all kinds of groups and who want to engage in a robust discussion there. And we have groups set aside specifically for allies and accomplices who do not have lived experience of racism and who want to spend time with others who are interested in discussing how allies and accomplices can work together to dismantle racism. So we're going to ask that the facilitators join the rooms first. And it's very important that if you're a facilitator, you jump into one of the rooms as appropriate. And then we will give others an opportunity to join. We will give you approximately 25 minutes in the breakout rooms to debrief about what we have learned today, to discuss how you are feeling, what your energy is like, how you're feeling in your body as a result of this discussion, how you want to proceed in terms of deep listening and understanding better lived experiences of racism, and how you might even wish to go forward, how this will govern your actions in the future. But first, please spend some time really going over what we've heard today. That listening is so much more important in times like these. We're so glad that you've joined us once again. And what we'd like to do is to encourage you to use the chat now, just to mention your biggest takeaway from today and from the chat group, the breakout room that you just experienced, in a word, in a phrase, or in a sentence. Please give us a sense of your response to one of these questions. In a word, in a phrase, or in a sentence. What have you learned today? What has given you fuel for your journey? How has your experience of this event been? So again, in the chat, we're just looking for brief comments, a word, a phrase, or one sentence that gives us a sense of your takeaway. We know certainly that intentionally building an environment that honors equity, inclusion, and belonging, not just diversity, that creates genuinely welcoming and loving faith communities is hard work. And we encourage you to keep examining your day-to-day practices at all levels, being honest about whether people have to hide or mask core parts of themselves to fit in, or whether indeed everyone can fit in, and to think about how each of us, working individually or collectively, can work and strive and succeed in dismantling racism. Before we conclude, I want to just review a few next steps. We do have a resource list to which everyone will have access. So there is a link that is called Resources for Racial Justice in and Through Canadian Churches, and we will ensure that you have access to that link. It will happen in a couple of ways. I believe the link is being placed in the chat so that you can copy it now, but also when we send out the post-event evaluation form, which we encourage everyone to fill out, we hope that you will take a moment as well to click on the link that will be shared with you that way by email. And in addition, I want to do a couple of things. First of all, thank the working group who helped to plan today's gathering. Natalie Appleyard, Kim Uedi Kai, myself, Irene Moore Davis, Beth Baskin, Edward Yankee, Simric Leask, David Monte Alegre Cuenca, Nadia Vinderkoop, and of course, we want to thank Jonathan Schmidt. And we all want to invite volunteers to help plan the next gathering of this network. We are committed to building and sustaining a community of practice of people who are committed to working on anti-racism together across the boundaries of our respective denominations. If you are interested in being involved in planning the next CEARN gathering, please indicate that in the chat. You only have to list your name and say that you'd be willing to volunteer. and we'll get in touch with you later. But please do consider becoming involved. This is a working group that we hope to expand, and we do hope to have more than one CEARN gathering per year. We hope that you have enjoyed today's program. We've had some very serious discussions today, and we've listened to some perspectives that are quite weighty. We've had courageous and candid conversations and some deep listening that requires a lot of energy. And we want to thank everyone who's been involved, whether as participants or as those who have indeed spoken in today's gathering. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our moderator. Thank you to Esther for the beautiful opening prayer. We know that the work of anti-racism can be quite tiring, including the inner work that each of us must do within ourselves before we can even begin to address such a major, massive, and deeply entrenched system as racism. We know that dismantling unjust structures can take a toll on us mentally, physically, and spiritually. So before we depart, I'd like to lead us through a very brief restorative exercise. Please assume a posture that is comfortable for you. Sit on a chair with your feet on the floor or sit cross-legged, whatever makes you feel at peace. And as long as you're stable and can remain in that position for just a few minutes, do whatever is comfortable for you. You're welcome to close your eyes or to focus on a point just ahead of you. And you're welcome to turn off your camera or to leave it on, whatever makes sense for you. Follow the sensation of your breath as it goes in and as it goes out. The following language is modified from the brilliant work of Cole Arthur Riley at Black Liturgies. So let's inhale. We are all members of one body. Let's exhale. We are all God's beloved children. Let's inhale. We can look toward the collective. Let's exhale. Our paths are not solitary. Let's inhale. Our practice is love. And let's exhale. We get free together. And finally, a closing prayer. I hope that you will join me. Holy One, in your image, you have created humankind in great diversity. We give thanks for the differences of cultures and ethnicities, of histories and life stories, of skin color and language, and hearts that love the world. Grant us hearts that listen and learn, egos that are willing to accept when our own racism is called out. Grant us courage to disassemble the systems, the stories, the mythos that privilege whiteness over all others. Give us your Holy Spirit's wind to call out racism in all its forms, inside our hearts, inside the church, and in your world. Give us the strength, the wisdom, and the will. Help us to be anti-racist in all that we say, in all that we do, in all that we are. It is time. It is well past time. God of all creation, bless us all with what we need to march on, to live this work of anti-racism today, every day, always. In Jesus' name, may it be. These are excerpts from a prayer by the Right Reverend Richard Bott. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to those who have indicated in the chat that you are willing to serve as volunteers to plan our next gathering. Thank you to our panelists, moderators, organizing committee, the fabulous David, our technical support, brilliant mind. And thank you to everyone who has participated in building the resource list and to all of you who will be using it. Have a wonderful rest of your day.